conflict, which poses a complex challenge, giving rise to a polycrisis that demands innovative solutions. Navigating this nexus is crucial to safeguard vulnerable populations, marginalized groups, and the delicate balance of ecosystems. The speakers will focus on climate and human security, the geopolitics of climate, the challenge of migrant outflows, and gender and climate action. I now request the chair of session 3, Ms. Aisha Khan, to kindly proceed to the stage. I also request the speakers to take their seats. I now request the session chair to give her introductory remarks and take over the proceedings of the session from here. I would like to remind everyone to please keep their phones on silent mode during the session.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. Maybe, I'll come there. It's tilted. Yeah, Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here and to chair this session with such distinguished speakers and panelists and a remarkable audience who's here. So we're looking forward to some very interesting discussions that will follow as a result of the conversation that we will have. Increasingly, you will see in the last decade, especially, that climate is being called a polycrisis. And climate is a polycrisis because it is linked to everything. If you have scarcity of water, it will end up in drought. If you have abundance or too much of water, it will result in floods. That in turn will result in devastation, destruction. It will result in food security issues. It will lead to poverty. That will eventually lead to conflict. So here today, when we talk about this issue as a polycrisis, we are looking at it through the lens of South Asia. We know that climate is a global crisis. We also know that it has caused devastation in different forms, in different ways all over the world. In the last 2-3 years, I think very sharply we can focus on climate change related issues that have created destabilization, that have affected commodity prices, that have resulted in inflation. So the linkages between climate change and human security are very close. And today we're going to explore some of those issues that affect us directly as citizens, as Pakistanis, and as a country that is part of South Asia. We are very lucky to have very, very good panelists with us who are experts in their own field. Mr. Mohsin Hafiz, Anoka Aberatne, Harjeet Singh, and Dr. Shaheen Akhtar. I will just say a few words about why it is time for us to pay greater attention to these problems and look at it through the regional lens, because climate change is going to impact South Asia slightly differently than the rest of the world, because South Asia is warming up more rapidly. This is not the first time that the planet is facing a threat. There have been 5 extinctions. And if you go back and see anatomically, humans have emerged in their present state around 200,000 years ago, and civilization as we know it is about 6,000 years old. In the past, there have been 5 extinctions. There is one common denominator here: the change in the carbon cycle and the end of biodiversity. And we are headed in the same direction right now. The carbon cycle is changing drastically, and there are biodiversity losses that have been recognized through scientific studies. The IPCC report says that 1 million species are on the verge of extinction. So what does that mean for us in South Asia? What does it mean for the people? What does it mean for the ecosystems? I will invite our first panel speaker, Dr. Mohsin Hafiz, to please share his presentation and talk about the link between water-related issues, ecosystems, and their impact on people. Over to you, Dr. Hafiz.
Thanks to Aisha Khan. I don't have the access to share my screen. Would it be possible to get the access to the screen, sharing the screen?
We can see you if.
I cannot. I don't have a privilege to. I'm not able to share the screen. Please provide the access to this screen.
Can you please provide screen share? You have it?
Yes,
Yep.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Can somebody confirm that you're able to see it?
We can see your screen, yes.
All right, okay, good. So I will be talking about that on the water and then its impact on the human security and then the human well-beings and sharing certain examples from South Asia and comparing what's happening in Pakistan compared to the neighboring countries. And Dr. Aisha Khan has explained that one very well, the direction where we are. But in Pakistan or even in South Asia, water is around 80% is used. 80 in South Asia, the 80 to 90% for the agriculture, and as well as for the remaining is for the other purpose. In the context of Pakistan, around 90% water is used for the agriculture, and then the remaining is used for the other purposes. So water security is very important on for the food security as well as on the national security. Now the climate change, which is becoming more common phenomenon over the last 5 years for the Indus Basin, that is also having impact. If there is a more rainfall, then we'll be impacting. And as well as if there is less rainfall, there is a drought there, that's also we are having the impact. And we have witnessed the example of 2022, first the heat wave and later on. And based on the non-traditional, non-strategic security, the issues of water has been also considered as one of the security risks for the based on the recent report. So now what's happening? Let's have a look around the globe. The national water security, this is the work done by the Asian Development Bank, where AMI also contributed for the key issue on the water-related disaster security. So we looked around the rural household water security, then that's talking about agriculture, health impact and everything, economic aspect of water security, then going on the urban water security, and then the environmental water security, and last is coming on the water-related disaster security, which is on a climatic risk, hydrological risk, and meteorological risk. And that will be the focus for today's presentation. They looked around in 56 countries of the Asia Pacific. And on the y-axis, there are the countries, and on the x-axis, it's about that one, the indexes are given it, and whether we're at the nascent stage or we in advanced stage, and color codes are categorized to the different security index. Unfortunately, Pakistan is in the bottom 3. We are in very infancy stage and various activities, but one of the important things where we are far behind than all the Asian, South Asian countries, even Afghanistan, worse than that one is on the water-related disaster. We don't have a proper disaster warning system. We don't have it. We are very good in disaster. When the disaster happened, then planning at that time, but not how we could prevent on that one disaster, how we could be well prepared, how we could utilize the science and everything to be informed to the citizens so they are not impacted, whether it's a 2022 flood or it's the other events which are commonly happening. So we looked around that one. This is the map is showing it what's happening and the challenges in the Indus Basin, which is considered one of the critical tower, water tower in the globe. And now comparing what's happening in the Indus Basin with the Ganga and Brahmaputra Basin. This is the Indus Basin, and then the other is the Ganga and Brahmaputra. You see that one Indus Basin on the below the hydrograph, that's clearly showing that one the Indus Basin is heavily dependent on snowfall and glacier melt. While compared to the Ganges and Brahmaputra, Ganges is less and Brahmaputra is there is a bit more spread there. But Indus is a more critical on that one. And when we are saying 90% of water is used for the agriculture. Out of that one, we know that 70% water is coming, and here that's showing its snapshot of that one. Where is the water used? Water is primarily used for in Pakistan, part of that one, for the kharif season, and also then that is being used for various crops. So again, that one, the maize crop is very important. Sugarcane crop, which is a high water delta crop, that's also that's also using a heavy amount of water. What's happening in comparing to the other countries? Again, the situation is the Indus Basin is very critical there because what's happening, the climate change, glaciers are melting, and many studies have predicted in 2060, 70, there'll not be enough snow available. What will be the impact on that one and the agriculture sector? Here, looking at around that one, the meltwater used for the Indus Basin for various crops, comparing the Indus with Ganges. Again, we are saying Indus, many crops are dependent, but in case of Ganges, only the sugarcane crop is dependent on that one. And when we're looking around the productivity of that one, again, this is showing the pictorial representation. On the left-hand side is the Indus Basin, and on the right-hand side is Ganges and Brahmaputra, where we see hardly any contribution except the sugarcane, but our all crops are dependent on that one. In terms of the productivity of that one, in Indus Basin around here, we are talking about the different crop. 15% of annual 19 million ton of rice production is attributed to the glacier and snowfall melt. But in case of when we are looking around the Ganges, it's around 7%. Is not amount is less, but then in terms of productions, we are talking about sugarcane. 103 million tons of the sugarcane production is there. Glacier and snowfall melt. So what will happen? These are the again different climate projection scenario. What will be the likely impact on the Indus, and then the various aspect of that one, and contribution of groundwater to the irrigation in Pakistan. At least around 60% of groundwater is contributing for the irrigation. But what's happening in the future? Let's look around the future. Forget about the past. Here, the population will be further increasing. Basin GDP is increasing. Climate change is there, and here on the looking around the water use at the moment in 2015 compared to 2080. So we need much more water. More water is required for the energy. More water is required for the food, and that will be critically impacting on human people and everything. That's why we need to think about that one. What we could do, how we could provide that and enough water for the future. And that, of course, we need to optimize that one, the water available, and thinking water as a critical factor in the nexus of energy, food, and in the climate change, and what we could do differently. So we did a study which is indicating on that one, the water is cutting across that one, but then the intersection of the nexus is important, issue is very important for the water when we are talking about, so that we could adapt to the climate change. Therefore, the adaptation to the climate change is important across all those policies, and that's where the Pakistan need to spend a much more effort, and everything is there. On a nutshell, in Pakistan, we are working on a silo approach, but we need to go for a holistic perspective of water management, because this is a whole part of the landscape. And when we are talking about that one, the system level perspective that could helpful on that one, water availability, water use for multiple sectors. That's where now the satellite internet tools are things we could provide a much better information to overcome on the data paucity and provide a much more solutions, integrated solution for the whole basin level. Sharing one or two examples, what's happening, we have a CGIAR initiative, Water, Energy, Food Ecosystem Nexus, where we are looking around managing trade-off and build. And that's about, want to make sure water security is not cost of the energy security, not at the cost of food security, but considering the external factor, climate change, population growth, governance, and all those are important there. Ultimate goal is that one, we make sure the ecosystem is healthy, people are there, economies are growing it. And that's very important on that one. We are talking about system level approach, which is going beyond that one, the integrated water source management approach, which was 10 years ago, very common. And we are talking about multi-level and multi-set governance is there, and making sure that when gender, youth are part and parcel of that one. Therefore, in order to do that one, we are working in Indus Basin along with the other basin is there for quantification and accounting of water for food, energy, resources there. Trying to link the upstream downstream interdependency there, so that we could use the water as a shared benefit and trade off across the countries and sector there. And finally, how that could be contributing to the link for the search for development output, support the implementation of policies, and here for the water, national water policy and climate change policies remain. In that context, we are developing the hydrological model SWAT, which is providing us the information on water availability for the whole Indus Basin about that one. And we are also doing that one, the environmental flow assessment for that one, how that the water which is less available, how that's impacting on the downstream, the Kotri barrage and other part of the river reaches where that the peoples are impacted due to lack of water, and then the flora and fauna is also impacted there. Another example is just want to share it on quickly on that one, the conflict, migration, and then the fragility, which is the fragility. This is another CGIAR initiative where we are looking at climate-induced migration. What's the impact, especially when there is lack of water available or abundant of water, how that's impacting on the community, and especially on the climate-induced migration, what we could do on anticipatory action there. And then that could be bridging the scientific gap and stabilize the people and accelerate those the government policies and everything. Not going through the further details of that one, but we are assessing that one, the areas, what the anticipatory action, how we could strengthen the information so that improve the water governance. So based on evidence basis that would minimize the impact of the crisis, and for the action scheme and promote peace building. So we have selected the Rahim Khan district as a part of that one, which is impacted by flood, drought, locust attack, and then the waterborne diseases are pretty common there. And we are working with the communities, looking around that one, what's the impact of this is a designated site in the 2022 flood. Around that one, the schools as well as the primary school, the capacity there, some of the scoping visit. The post-2022 flood internal migrants are also there. So just showing it the side where we are doing in-depth analysis, saying how we could develop a digital that one, the system there, and also working with the government to improve that one, the anticipatory action to make sure that communities are more resilient, and what could be the strategies working on that one. So that's a part of that one, the migrant communities who have moved from that one in any particularly flood year. And similarly, we are doing the assessment of that one, the drought, the locust attack, in that one, the Cholistan Desert, and I will be sharing the findings in very soon. Lastly, this is some of the field visit of that one. Lastly, the important for water security, we need to build a larger dam, but we need to go for the small localized rainwater harvesting and nature-based solution that need to be introduced. That's in I-8 Peshnar Park, the site which we have worked on that one. And this is just showing it over a 4-month period of time. We were able to have it around 5 million gallons of water was able to harvest it on that one, and that's over a period of time. And then that's also improved the localized the recharge there and everything there in I-8 over the 1 year. And then that also improved the water quality and everything. In a nutshell, when we are talking about water security, Pakistan need to really improve on a significantly on a they're thinking about out of the box solution and working it, how we could improve the resilience of communities at the grassroots level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohsin Hafiz. That was an excellent presentation, and I think you've shared a lot of facts based on which there'll be an interesting discussion in the Q&A session part. So we hope that you will stay with us and we will carry forward the discussion to see how actually now all of this links to the region, links to conflict, links to the looming crisis that we have gathered here to discuss. Just like climate change is an overarching theme or threat, I think geopolitics or politics also is an overarching theme under which everything else falls. We talk about a shift from politics, but that's actually not true. I think we don't need to shift from politics. It's the constant. Everything comes under it, whether we talk about economics, whether we talk about climate change, whether we talk about social or environmental indicators. And I've seen that as someone who's attended Conference of Parties over the last 9 or 10 years, that climate is also a political issue. The decisions taken there are based on a political agenda. So we need to look at the geopolitics of our own region and to talk more about that and how a changing climate is going to influence political decision-making and what different countries, given their own location and their own social economic agenda, need to do to shape South Asia to face a world that is changing very fast. It's changing politically, it's changing economically, it's changing climatically. So we all have to adapt. And essentially, adaptation is not about building resilient infrastructure alone. Adaptation means that you need to change the way you start looking at the world and adapt to the new emerging realities and threats that are coming up. So to talk more about that, I'm going to invite Ms. Anoka Aberatne. You've joined us. I can see you. Over to you, Ms. Anoka. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me clearly.
Yes, just raise the volume a little bit, maybe, and then you're fine.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for having me here. And I wanted to actually touch on a few things that the speaker before me, Dr. Mohsin, also touched on, as well as you. So when we speak about geopolitics, climate migration comes up as one of the most important factors right now, especially because small island states are undergoing rapid sort of changes because of climate change in terms of understanding how disasters are happening right now as well. I think all of us across the region have had challenges that have come across, mostly because of new types of storms that are coming up and how these are affecting our countries as well. And if you look at the long-term migration statistics, even in my country of Sri Lanka, as well as I'm sure even in Pakistan, you are having different challenges because of the water situation, but also it is so closely linked to climate change. So when we understand the geopolitics of climate change and how all of these disasters are affecting us, it also comes to the point where we need to understand that we have an absolute need for a collective effort or a strategy, which all the South Asian countries can perhaps come together and decide even on disaster mitigation and adaptation techniques, as well as support for the same. And you mentioned the Conference of Parties, and yes, it's incredible to see and understand the progress that has been made. And if we look at how climate technologies, for example, hydroponics, or even working on better methods of farming in agriculture, the South Asian context doesn't necessarily have access or the ability to spend a lot on research and development. And this is definitely something that we need to understand from a geopolitical context, and also perhaps in terms of working together in a way that we can perhaps develop some of these technologies together, because a lot of the challenges that we have across the region are quite similar. If you really look at it from a perspective of understanding both droughts, floods, even mountain slides. So if you look at all of these contexts, then we can definitely understand ways of working together. And under the Conference of Parties, the Loss and Damage Fund, this has been one of the biggest developments from a global perspective and a geopolitical perspective of understanding how small island states or vulnerable countries, like all of us, how we could perhaps gain access to the support, the monetary funds as well, to support the way that we could move together and work together in terms of either adaptation or mitigation mechanisms. So in understanding how we work across these, as well as cross-border challenges which come across as poaching or even pollution, including plastics. As you know, during storms, sometimes you do have challenges where the plastics do come from different countries and get swept into another country, as well as wildfires. So in kind of understanding how best we can work together and bringing together new perspectives from different governments, different civil society bodies, and understanding how best to utilize perhaps even SARC funding to really support each other. That's where I see people moving together and working together so that we have a conducive mechanism as South Asians to tackle all the challenges that we are all facing right now. And we will face, as you can see, the World Economic Forum statistics and the information around the risks that will continue to increase in terms of biodiversity, agriculture, water security, which will also lead to threats of national security as well. So understanding all of that, it would be amazing to see perhaps mechanisms where we could all work together more cohesively and conducively to address these. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Totally agree for the need for collaboration and for a better integration. I'm now going to invite Harjeet Singh to share his thoughts with us. Harjeet has been a regular at COP, Conference of Parties, and he's a strong voice who speaks for South Asia on climate justice. He is very active on loss and damage, and he raises certain issues which reflect the wishes, the aspirations, the constraints, the challenges of us as South Asian as a whole, and not of one specific country. So, Harjeet, what I'd like to hear more from you is on the out-migration issue, because you've dealt on that for a long, long time. And given the fact that South Asia is a climate hotspot, what is likely to happen? Also, because we have such a vast piece of land here, in which we have a different geography, a different topography, and we have different challenges which bring together mountain issues, coastal issues, arid issues, desert ecologies. So there's a lot at stake, and that will be at play over here when the impacts of climate change start to intensify. How do you think that's going to affect the human security in South Asia? And also, some way forward on where climate now offers us a window for cooperation to take this forward on purely a humanitarian agenda and leave other things aside. Is that realistically possible or not? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Aisha, and a pleasure to join you all on this panel. Let me build on what Ms. Anoka and Dr. Hafiz mentioned. Let me share a presentation.
Speak a little bit louder, please.
Sure. Can you?
A little bit louder, maybe.
Okay, let me try and see. Is it better?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just put the microphone even more closer. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, let me just try and put it full screen. So, as you suggested, I'm going to cover some of the issues related to migration. I know in this conference, you've already discussed a lot on climate impacts, but I thought I'll just put this slide, which comes from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, just to understand that when we talk about climate change, we normally refer to so-called conventional disasters like floods, drought, storms. But if you look at this infographic, you realize that we are now going way beyond some of those conventional disasters. And we also need to talk a lot more about desertification, the rise in temperature. And this region has seen heat waves, unprecedented heat waves, and the risk is only multiplying. The impact of glacial retreat and melting, loss of biodiversity, ocean acidification, salinization, land and forest degradation, things that we really do not discuss as much as we need to. And another important aspect when we talk about climate impacts, not only to look at economic losses, where we normally deal with agriculture production losses, or how business operations are affected, or how infrastructure is lost, but also the so-called non-economic losses in terms of impact on health, human mobility, and that's the core thing that we are discussing today. Even the societal and cultural identity, a loss of language, loss of culture, ecosystem services, and so on. So just to understand the scale of impacts that we are now seeing when it comes to climate change impacting the entire world, and particularly, Aisha, as you said, this is the disaster, South Asia is a disaster hotspot. This is quite telling. If you look at the internal displacement, this report is from IDMC, Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. More than 60 million people were displaced in 2022. This report came last year. And disasters are now, if you look at between conflict and disasters, because this session is tackling both, 53% share of internal displacements are triggered by disasters. And the number is 32.6 million people. And the important thing is to recognize that 6 out of 10 disaster displacements were triggered by floods. And if you could not clearly see that number in the infographic, 98% of disaster displacements were triggered by weather-related hazards such as floods, storms, and drought. So this report primarily looked at that, but then there's also, as I said, impact of so-called slow onset events. Another important thing to note, how disaster displacements have been increasing over the last few years. If you compare the average, the increase in disaster displacements in 2022 were more than 41%. So this is quite scary. Let's look at South Asia a little more closely. There were 12.6 million displacements. So 1/5 of the global displacements are happening in this particular region. And our region is affected by floods a lot more when it comes to displacement. So 90% of regions' disaster were triggered by floods. And of course, we all know what happened in Pakistan in 2022, and impacts continue. 1/4 of global displacements were triggered by monsoon flooding in Pakistan. So that's the scale. So imagine one disaster in one country can have a huge impact on displacement numbers overall. And of course, it is about people getting affected. And if you look at conflict figures, of course, we have countries like Afghanistan affected by conflict, but disasters are particularly affecting, and that to climate-related disasters. I've been engaged on the issue of migration for a long time. And in the last few years, while I was in ActionAid, I worked very closely with Climate Action Network to come up with a series of reports studying this region in particular, starting with this report called Climate Change Knows No Borders in 2016. And then we came up with several reports over the next few years. There were national reports and regional reports. So if I talk about the overall findings, very, very clearly, climate change is a critical driver of displacement, as you saw also coming out from the IDMC report. Dr. Hafiz did mention about rate of population growth and also distribution, but let's also recognize the way emissions are rising. That is going to directly impact the scale, which means the way we are continuing to burn fossil fuels, and that is increasing temperatures, and which is going to affect displacement directly. Of course, the displacement, the scale also depends on the social and economic factors, such as resource availability, social networks, and livelihood opportunities. And it also, then these disasters drive mass displacement. The reality is that people do undergo routine migration, but then how these increasing disasters are going to cause much more permanent migration as well, which is not usually the first adaptive response. So we are seeing more and more short to medium term migration. People are creating more large slums, which often also lack basic services. Let's also understand that there has been a understanding that migration is good, but the kind of migration we are seeing, and especially the kind of lives people live in urban slums which lack basic services, that's not the migration that we are seeing as part of development. Women, children, elderly, and persons with disabilities are far more affected. Another aspect that we don't talk enough about is people who are trapped. There are people who would like to migrate because they have no options left, and their coping mechanism is failing, but they don't even have as much resources to even migrate to survive. And people who have more social and human capital, they migrate in a planned manner. So again, the socioeconomic factors play a huge role in the kind of migration people have. There are also long-term issues emerging from extreme weather events, which is forcing people to migrate. And here, let me also highlight the governance mechanism. So countries who have less resources and their governance systems are weak, that's where people are going to get a lot more affected. Very specifically for South Asia, again, high population density levels, diverse geoclimatic zones, all kinds of impacts we are facing, and it's exacerbating poverty. There's interplay of climate change, migration, security, and that's where, as you were saying, human security issue becomes really important. And we've also seen conflicts, between the host communities and migrants. A little more from South Asia. Migration has been a pattern in the region, but the way it is increasing because of the push factors, which also include conflict, poverty, land access, ethnicity, that need to be recognized. Yes, there are pull factors, for people migrating for better livelihoods or seasonal labor or access to health, that also needs to be recognized. But at the policy level, we still don't look at climate migration as a major push factors, which needs to happen. And that's why it is largely still invisible when it comes to policies. So which means that people are going through a lot more unsafe migration than a planned and supported migration where it is inevitable. And of course, women are far more impacted and other vulnerable groups face many more challenges. Another aspect that we found from these studies is there's a need for clear definition, because when we talk about mobility, it has several aspects to it, displacement, migration, or forced migration, or permanent relocation. So many of these concepts still not being discussed at length, and that's where policymakers must recognize how it is increasing and what the policy gaps are. In terms of responses, again, enhancing resilience is something that we have to be doing, which means making sure that people have enough support so that their right to stay is recognized. And then how we integrate development, adaptation, and risk reduction strategies. Speakers before me did talk about solidarity. It is going to be absolutely fundamental for a region like ours, where we share rivers, oceans, forests, and mountains. So how we are going to ensure that people are supported. There are international mechanisms happening, and there's a task force for displacement, but that has to do a lot more work in terms of developing scenarios based on warming levels. And the Warsaw International Mechanism, along with the task force for displacement, should also look at legal protection and fulfillment of human rights, which is not, and particularly people who are forced to cross borders. I've briefly covered that. I know I don't have a lot of time, but in terms of policy landscape, as I said, it varies. There are countries who have a lot more experience in terms of dealing with disasters and supporting migrant communities. Our policies yet are required to be climate proof, and they still don't look at the range of impacts. As I said, we only look at conventional disasters and not as much slow onset events. And there are many gaps related to implementation in terms of financial resources, climate attribution, scientific information, institutional weaknesses, and so on. And then there are countries like Bangladesh who have a lot more experience and they can share with other countries. The report also captured people solutions, so how even education is so important for girls and boys, and management of resources. And we know climate only exacerbates the situation. So better management of water resources help in dealing with erratic weather patterns and emergencies. Of course, we need to strengthen basic services and facilities and provide more job opportunities and livelihood diversification. Let me very briefly cover the regional recommendations. There's a lot more cooperation that is needed. And we know that SAARC has not been as efficient. We are seeing BIMSTEC coming up as a regional forum. Not all countries in South Asia are part of it. There's also Budapest process that also looks at migration at an international level. We need to have many more regional cooperation initiatives. There are some which have seen some traction, such as South Asia Cooperative Environment Program and Integrated Mountain Development. So we need to have models of regional cooperation. We have seen some experiences coming from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. So for water distribution and so on. Another thing that can really help us as a region is common set of policies, codes, and responses, which we all can learn and practice. And of course, much more data sharing and analysis, which can help. Media can play a very important role in highlighting this issue across the region. And of course, this being a justice issue, we would like international community to come forward and play their role as part of their obligation. Let me stop by just sharing that I also worked on a roadmap to develop a framework for protection of climate migrants, which talks about, I'm not going to go into details, but I'm going to leave this presentation behind, where we looked at certain principles that we need to be adopting. Again, governments have to take a lead. These are just to get us started, how we need to recognize the scale of migration. We need to talk about the urgency and respect for human dignity, human rights, and so on, and developing solutions. And we also proposed 4 steps to develop that. That's what is needed. We can keep talking about it, but unless our governments take a lead by recognizing it, by ensuring that there's collaboration and cooperation, they develop a plan, and then that plan has to be implemented. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hardeep. I think you've raised enough issues here for the audience to come back for a deeper dive conversation with you in the Q&A session. You're quite right that the demographic shifts that we're likely to witness as a result of climate-induced migrations are going to pit vested interest groups against each other for grab of resources and lead to societal upheavals and conflict. So there's a lot of material for the audience here to digest in terms of what all these things cumulatively mean, because as each speaker talks and shares facts with you, they are presenting different sides of the multifaceted impacts of climate change. So we've talked about geopolitics, we've talked about water, we've talked about the flow of migrations. Now we're going to talk about gender. Because in South Asia, when we look at a population of about 2 billion people, half of them are women. And all of South Asia, with varying degrees of slight difference, is a patriarchal society where the role of women is not optimized, where women are not equal partners in development, where women are not taken on board as decision makers. So what does that mean for a region where half the population is rendered vulnerable, not simply because it is born vulnerable, because it is made vulnerable by society? So what are the kind of challenges that we're going to face in South Asia, and how well prepared are we as a country and as a region to respond to this enormous challenge where half the population will disproportionately also suffer the brunt of climate change? So this is also a cause for climate justice or gender justice. To speak more on this, I will invite Dr. Shaheen Akhtar to share her presentation with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me opportunity to share my thoughts on gender and climate action, which is very, very important as being already contextualized. My first, the way I thought to start was like, why it's important to look at the gender climate actually connection, the linkage, the nexus that we come across, and the half of the population was like on the top. You see everywhere in this country or around the globe, you find 50% or more than 50% of the population is actually woman. The second thing is why one would like to really look at the impact is the vulnerability, and that vulnerability is actually because of it's embedded in the patriarchal structure that they are actually born in. And how climate change is going to impact them is a woman and men are impacted by climate change very differently. And the more vulnerable will be definitely affected more severely. So this is what is coming out from the different experiences of the extreme events. If you look at whether it in our own country or across the say world, and these vulnerabilities are embedded in inequalities, that they are existing social inequalities which have also reflected in the political and economic say lack of participation, empowerment. And what climate change does is it expands, intensifies those vulnerability, and then obviously woman will be at the receiving end of the climate change. And we should also underline that the intersectionality within the marginalized group, because there will be women who will be little more, economically well off or politically, more empowered or economically empowered, but there will be which come from the very marginalized group. So those will be probably the affected more. So this is the context that we have actually. And if you look at the picture that emerges in the context of Pakistan, so the gender landscape of Pakistan, our constitution says all are equal when it comes to the the sex, no discrimination. But what is happening is Pakistan is one of the leading countries in terms of the gender gap. If you look at the gender gap index 2022, Pakistan is 145 out of 146, and the Human Development Report on Gender Equality Index says that it is 161, out of 191. So very, very poor. Women are very, very poorly placed in terms of gender equality, and that is actually reflected in actually their situation or status when it comes to the participation, whether it is in terms of access to education, health, or political participation, economic participation. So in all, you see that it's not really very a situation which will enabling situation which will actually build their resilience or allow them to really play a critical role in climate action. If you look at the political side, you will find that they are only, 4.5% in that. If you look at the financial literacy or digital literacy, they are faring very poorly in that. So here is this context, and as you look at and move on, what you see is that in Pakistan, women experience with the climate change has been that they have been very badly affected. They are at the greater risk, whether it is a mountain woman, whether it is a desert woman, whether it is a woman living in the plain. So especially in the 2022 floods, we come across the how the women were very badly affected in all those domains disproportionately, and especially in the disaster, you find that the women are likely to be more vulnerable 14 times actually compared to the men. So in the 22 disaster, this flood disaster, what you see is about 650,000 women and girls who were pregnant were directly impacted by those floods. They were more vulnerable to the food shortages. They were more vulnerable to vector-borne diseases. And in fact, there was an increase in the, domestic violence in the flood-affected areas. So it is like the situation is pretty grim when in the context of Pakistan. So if you move on from there to what Pakistan is doing about it in terms of its policy demand and what is the effective action plan that Pakistan is coming up with, and how we see the situation on the ground. Pakistan is trying to be gender inclusive, and if you look at the environment policy which was introduced in 90s, you see that it mentions or it say at least talks about the connection between the gender of woman and the climate. But as you move on, you see that different policies that came from time to time, and especially the National Climate Change Policy 2021, it talked about the recognize, women's concern or the impact of climate change on the woman, especially the rural woman in the agriculture sector. and especially those which are more likely to be affected by the extreme weather events. Then Pakistan's second national communication on climate change to the UNFCCC talks about, in fact, that women are going to be strongly affected by the climate change. What you see is that gradually, and in the recent time, the policy that have come up, they talk more about doing something about taking some action, which is basically going to bring women into the or build their into the climate resilience conversation, and also to have the strategies and action on the ground which are going to actually make a difference. Especially but at the same time, you see many policy like national climate adaptation plans, you don't really see much. You just mentioned the gender, youth, and social inclusion, and very briefly. So it's still not really recognizing or make how women can be actually brought into or mainstreamed in the climate change resilience building. Internationally also, Pakistan subscribes to the UNFCCC, Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework, UN SDGs, and then also Pakistan has a party to the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and CEDA. While all in the policy, it looks very appealing, and then we have the gender action plan as well, which actually came after the 22 floods. So you can see the context. You have the climate shock, and then the reaction. Obviously, there is an increased focus on the gender concerns. But going beyond, I mean, the policy may be, appear to be gender sensitive, but whether these policy which talk about taking action where it is required, and especially the gender action plans talked about, 6 priority areas, whether if you look at whether some appropriate or substantive action being taken, that you really don't find much. The sector identified are really very important, disaster risk reduction, because that is on the topmost, and Pakistan is going to really face recurrent extreme events. And in the past few years, we have witnessed those. So that means that a woman will be increasing, and a lot of being vulnerable. But it is there is a gender cell within the climate NDB or at the DDMA level or at the district level, but you really don't find that actually that being constitutive even. So I mean, how one can expect that if they are not really in the policy making domain, decision making, and that is really the context that Pakistani women are actually in. They are not really integrated when it comes to the implementation of the policy. Implementation in any case is very weak, very ineffective. It's not really happening. It's really good to see good policies, and we have always have very impressive policies. But when it comes to the implementation, it is like been very, very weak. The second area that it identifies is the agriculture and the food security. Again, Pakistan being an agrarian country, and women are increasingly engaged in the farming sector. You see that their contribution as well as vulnerability in that, but not much has been happening in that as well. Forest and biodiversity, if you look at the mountain women, you find that they are very, very connected with and dependent on for their livelihood on the environment. Again, you don't really find much initiatives being taken. So in all, what you see is a good policy for framework, good institutional framework, guiding principle, but on the ground, you hardly see any initiative being taken to really take or implement this, gender action plan in terms of the capacity building of the women. There can be local initiative on their own, but not at the state level. Knowledge sharing and communication is really very, very poor when it comes to the climate change, awareness, knowledge. And it is there most of the time community initiative that you come across. The gender balance in terms of the woman leadership in the climate action, which is very, very critical. We don't see it happening. Monitoring and reporting is also like when it comes to the climate action, we don't really see on the ground. So it's very poor, ineffective implementation that you see at the moment. So by having gender sensitive policies or gender even responsive, and when we talk about the gender responsives, it means is there any action which tends to really reduce the existing inequalities, whether they are the social inequalities, whether they are economic inequalities or political, like in terms of decision making. So we don't really see, but what actually is required for the building the resilience of the woman in terms of responding to the climate crisis is gender transformative action, actually on the part of the both state and the society, which you do not see, which means you are changing not only the inequalities, but the norms. And the way you look at the role of the woman in responding to the climate change that has to undergo, phenomenal change. So at the moment, there's not really very, promising picture. What we need actually is to move forward is the gender proofing of the frameworks on the climate change and looking at the implementation of the climate change gender action plan. We don't have anywhere. They have just prepared one document, launched it, but how to contextualize it in different provinces, different districts, different communities, it has not really happened. So specific data sets that review the human vulnerability, especially woman vulnerability to the climate change, that needs to be developed, and special policy frameworks that actually can bring transformative change in the context of building resilience to climate change, need to actually while women are at the receiving end of the climate change, women are also at the heart of climate action. So to build their ability to first to reduce their own vulnerability and then to contribute in building the climate resilient communities and societies, you have to create enabling condition. You have to recognize their role, their power, and while I was looking at the title of this regional dialogue, I was thinking of where are the women regional voices. You see, it is good to really flag Pakistani women, how we are like faring when it comes to the climate change vulnerability, but also looking at the South Asian woman, and there are like very good practices being part of several such a conversation. One realizes, so sharing the learning from the best practices probably, and the regional dialogue of women on the climate crisis probably would be very important in our context. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaheen. The data that you have shared and the facts that you have shared with the audience on the plight of gender is certainly very dismal. But trying to look for something optimistic, I was counting the number of women that are present in this room, and I'm happy to say that at least in this room, the gender parity is very good, although on the national scale, maybe it is very poor. So that gives us reason for hope that eventually, yes, it may be slow, but it will build up, and the women in Pakistan and in the region will have a larger role to play. I will now open the floor for Q&A for the virtual panel speakers. Let me just share that you have a very robust audience here. We have diplomats with us, we have academics with us, we have security analysts with us, we have historians with us, we have researchers with us. So you will get, I'm sure, a variety of questions, and we will have a very interesting and interactive dialogue. To the audience, may I just request that when you ask a question, try to keep it brief, and please say who you are directing the question to and identify yourself. And if you're affiliated with any organization, please state that name as well. So I now open the floor for the Q&A session. We have Ambassador Najmus Saqib with his hand that shot right up. So over to you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. My name is Najmus Saqib. I am a student of political science. That is my introduction, ma'am. And a small little question to Dr. Shaheen Akhtar and one question for Mr. Harjeet Singh. With two heavyweight ladies sitting on the stage, I think the gender equality should have been talked about the men as such. But I'm happy, as Ma'am Aisha has said, that it's good to know. Now, my question would be that when we talk about gender equality, which kind of women we are talking about? Because there are women who are sitting under this roof. There are women who are sitting in front of Islamabad Press Club coming from Balochistan. There are women who are at home, being molested and being maltreated. There are women who are saying that we don't want any, courtesies or favors from men because mera jism, meri marzi. So which kind of women are we talking about, and what is our focus? And how can you formulate a policy at the national level for all these kinds of women in one go? So don't you think that we need to, first of all, reduce this yawning gap between the concept of woman in Pakistan? That is my question to you. And the second question we will...
Please ask it right now.
Okay. The first recommendation in, the presentation, a wonderful presentation, we saw Mr. Harjeet Singh talking about 3 forums, the Budapest process, SAARC, and the third one was BIMSTEC. Now, how can we talk about promoting climate change or any migration issues through these forums when we haven't heard of any processes going on in this, and they are actually practically ineffective, and they are dysfunctional? So how can we actually proceed on this aspect?
Okay, Dr.
Thank you,
Shaheen, can you go first, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. In fact, I started my talk with the intersectionality being flagged. So intersectionality is which groups are the most marginalized, which communities are the most marginalized. So women who are actually from the marginalized community, you have to look at those women. And vulnerability, we don't have vulnerability index as yet in place. So you have to identify the marginalized communities first in different parts of, like, if you say about Pakistan, we know those area, but within that, so unless we have that data with us, which I talked about towards the end, we should have vulnerability data regarding the woman. And those women are your target group, you see. You have to really focus on them, and you have to really build their resilience. So it is like BISP you have. So marginalized group, one way of looking at it. But it is like in the mountain communities, you have those marginalized communities, and you have in the desert communities, so you have those marginalized communities and the marginalized women. And even in the urban areas, you will find that. So you have to, that is the homework that we all need to really actually do. We are not talking about the empowered woman or the least affected woman. And preparedness actually is about like, are you actually exposed to the, say, that particular vulnerability or not? So if you are well prepared, if you have more resources to be prepared, you are not that, say, exposed. And by that, you are not that vulnerable and not actually being affected. So you can see that. So that is the actual intersectionality which we have to really observe. And there's very little discussion actually on the intersectionality part of, like, how you identify those groups of women. And especially the sector as well. For instance, the agriculture sector, if you say disaster, which are the most vulnerable district. We don't have the district actually, say, assessment on the multiple risks assessment, which we need to really have. So unless we have that kind of data set and initiative at those level, we will not be able to really build their capacities or say resilience. So we have to be like very, very action oriented.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just add on to that to say that, my idea of gender empowerment equality is that all women should have equal access and opportunity to resources. That is what doesn't happen. All women should be treated with dignity, and that goes across all the sectors that you're talking about, whether a woman is sitting at home working or not working, or whether a woman is in the workplace. Women should have a safe environment. They should have social spaces, psychological spaces, and other freedoms that men enjoy with equal access and facility. So that is, I think, applicable to all women. I will pass the floor to you, Harjeet, to respond to Ambassador Saqib's question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that point. And you being an ambassador, you understand the kind of political realities that we are facing in the region. And we know it's largely because of the conflict between India and Pakistan. We have not seen progress in SAARC, which has so much of potential. And it is so vital for us to come together as a regional bloc of countries and have the kind of cooperation which I listed in my recommendations, which are only limited to climate. But of course, the cooperation has to go way beyond climate. The reality is that while we have seen SAARC not working, or BIMSTEC, which has gained some momentum, but still not dealing with climate issues. Going back to 2010, the SAARC summit in Bhutan focused almost entirely on climate. So, there are conversations that are happening in both, but as I said, we have not been able to realize that potential. So what we need to be doing is to then depend on civil society a lot more. Because of the political and vested interest, we have not seen progress happening. I think that's where the track 2, track 3 dialogues that we have seen, which are led by civil society, is something that actually create a roadmap. At least we can start sharing the kind of policies we have, best practices, and a lot of cooperation can happen between us. And thankfully, technology helps. Look at, without even visa, I'm sitting here and talking to you all. So I think there's a lot more innovative ways that we can explore how civil society can come together, and also continuing to put pressure on our own governments that please grow beyond some of those geopolitics and something that we alluded to earlier, and look at the reality, climate change. And that's why our very first report on climate said, climate change knows no borders. That's what and that's the reality. We share mountains, rivers, oceans, and air, and temperatures. So we have no option but to cooperate. And that's why we have to, as I said, think beyond our immediate interest and think of us as a collective and act.
Before the next question, let me just share with you, this Ms. Anoka has left for a meeting, so she will not be available for the Q&A.
Law. This year is very important in human history because more than 4 billion people across the world are going to exercising their right to vote and the right of political participation. So my question to Mr. Harveer Singh is that in our region, because in Pakistan, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, we are going to have election this year. So how the migration, both internal and international migration, is going to impact on the voting rights of the internal migrants or the external migrants? How climate-triggered migration is going to impact the political rights of the region? Thank you.
Harjeet, to you.
I cannot speak for all the countries, but here in India, definitely our voting system is also becoming a lot more portable, as we call it. So even migrants will be able to vote. But normally what they do is they go back to their home locations and vote for their representative. The reality is that some of these issues, as I also noted in my presentation as one of the findings and also recommendation, forget about climate migration. Even climate change is still not a political issue. You see that not in the headline, but news where how it is impacting and even impacting farmers, which is a massive constituency, and other people around across the country. But politicians have not picked up this issue as much. So what we have to be doing is first to inform our policymakers and politicians on how big the issue is and how their own constituencies are going to be affected, and then connect the issue of migration. So it comes several levels down, unfortunately, when it comes to talking about the issue of migration with policymakers. It's the awareness is increasing across the board, and I see how parliamentarians and policymakers even attend climate conferences outside, so and also engage in the conversations domestically. But still, we have a long way to go to look at some of these challenges, as you very rightly picked up, even the issue of voting rights. And there are many more concerns in terms of banking, although technology has helped us improve a lot of access to many of these resources and even rights for that matter.
Ma'am. My name is Dr. Khalid. I'm director at ISRA. My question is to Mr. Harjeet Singh. You mentioned about the push and pull because of the climate migration. A very good concept. Could you please dilate and discuss it much more with quantification? And secondly, it's normally said that because of the climate action, the erstwhile concept of state sovereignty is getting blurred. Your comments on it. Thank you.
Sure. I may not have figures across all the issues, but when we talk about push factors, for example, we are looking at issues of conflict. And that's where I did show a slide how conflicts are increasing, and conflicts push people to migrate. Similarly, poverty levels. We already have the data in terms of how many people are poor, who don't have access to resources, and that's where land access is important. We were just talking about issues related to women's rights. We know that women do not have as much access to land. In fact, worldwide, it's barely 2 to 3% where women own land. And there are also issues related to ethnicity where we see conflicts happening, and that also push in India, I can say, and also many parts of Nepal, Bangladesh, even parts of Pakistan, where caste is an important issue, and then that pushes people to migrate. In terms of pull factors, again, as cities are the growth engines, and there are many more opportunities. 70% of of people are increasingly living in urban areas, and that's where the opportunities are. So, of course, that is a pull factor where you see how people, and especially with agrarian crisis, people are pushed to go to cities. So there's an interplay of both push and pull factors across the region, and that is what driving migration at this moment. And of course, when, as I said, as part of agrarian crisis, there's whole climate lens increasing these disasters. Sorry, what was your other point in terms of borders or lines being blurred? Well, absolutely. To some extent, that's what is going to happen, and people are going to go beyond their national borders to look for opportunities. But still, the migration across borders is still minuscule compared to the internal displacement, which is also a good news in a way, kind of good, because we know how their right, people who are forced to cross borders, their rights are still not being respected. There's a recognition of refugees, but not climate migrants, which means that if they are crossing borders, their rights are not being respected. And that's our demand, that how we need to provide legal protection to such people. At the same time, because the scale is much more in terms of internal displacement, we need to make sure that resources are available for countries to help people. And this is where we talk about two aspects of rights: right to stay and right to move. Right to stay means we need to ensure that there are enough resources and policies to support resilience so that people are not forced to migrate. But there are going to be inevitable situations where sea level rise or desertification is making it impossible for people to live because they are losing their land, or agriculture is not possible. Now, that's where migration is inevitable. So what kind of policies we need to put in place so that we can actually deal with and provide more assistance in migration, and also making sure it's orderly and managed. So we need to really look at issues across the board to make sure that we are looking at it comprehensively and supporting people who are being affected by climate change.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. I'm a student of data analytics. So I would like to ask, sir, that when we talk about climate change, majorly we will be talking about the impacts and the solutions for disasters normally which are related to floods or droughts. But there are many other disasters which have been triggered due to climate change. I would like to name one, which is landslides, and it is becoming an issue for Pakistan's highland particularly, which are, having 41% of the total landslide which occur worldwide. So how can we have, when it comes to Pakistan, how can the private sector and the government sector, they can join hands to institutionalize their efforts to address these issues, these type of issues particularly? And secondly, how we can have data-driven solutions for this problem? I mean, it is not a major issue which has occurred because of climate change, but still it is affecting lives and livelihood of a lot of people in Pakistan's highlands. So that's what I want to ask.
Who is your question directed to, please?
Sorry, Mr. Singh.
Harjeet, back to you.
Sure. I will not be able to speak a lot about Pakistan policies, particularly in reference to landslides, but the data that you shared is quite concerning and revealing. And that's why my very first slide was looking at the range of impacts that we are seeing because of climate change. And the world is still grappling and figuring out how climate change goes way beyond conventional disasters. And this is where, as you very rightly said, data-driven policy making and action is extremely important. And that's what is missing in many of the developing countries, including Pakistan, where both governments and the private sector do not have sufficient information. And data like this, and also looking at how many people are getting impacted, how we can also have measures that are more friendly with nature. And I've seen many of these initiatives where, and this is where it also intersects with the kind of development we are having. I can tell you in parts of India where we see a lot of destruction happening in the name of development in the mountains, that is actually affecting the sensitive and ecologically fragile regions. And that is causing a lot more landslide. So landslide is not only because of climate change. And as I always say, it is exacerbating the risks and vulnerabilities that we already have. So we need to also question the kind of development model that we are facing and interrogate a bit more whether these landslides are happening primarily because of climate change, or climate change is only increasing these incidences because our development is making things far more vulnerable in those regions. So you are right, we need to analyze further and then get all stakeholders, including private sector, to make sure that their actions are in harmony with nature and are not destructing the ecosystem and in turn affecting climate.
Dr. Shaheen, would you like to add on to that?
Thank you so much. Well, you are very right that especially mountain communities in northern Pakistan, in Azad Kashmir in particular, I have come across that they are being hugely affected by the landslides. One of the leading disaster which is affecting the mountain communities. Like one data, there are known big, landslides which are happening, recurring. You can see that whether it is Kohala Muzaffarabad Road or it is a Neelam, road, Muzaffarabad Road. But I think in terms of solution, you have to go for the slope stabilization. And slope stabilization, if you opt for the nature-based solution, there's a lot of work being done on that. And the nature-based solution is actually you rely on the the material which is available to the community around and the expertise and the manpower. So which is like easily accessible and is cost effective as well. So if you go for that, there are more expensive solution. You can see that if you travel from Islamabad to Muzaffarabad, will come across and there's a recurrent landslides happening, Islamabad to Kotli. So there are recurrent, slides which are blocking the communication, the road, and also, directly causing harm to the community. So that is, I think, very important. And these are soft Himalayas, young Himalayas. So you will have those landslides happening all the time, especially when there are intense, rains. And also when there are avalanches, especially in the Neelam area, you have the clouds. And if there is a, temperature rise, abnormal temperature rise, you will find more. So this is what was expected this time. Maybe we will going to have a more warmer summer, and we may experience more glove incident and leading to the landslides and the flash floods, which is like connected with them. So nature-based solution probably is one of the area which is very cost effective for the communities to resolve. Thank you.
I think I'll just add on to that to say deforestation, and I think overpopulation and not having a proper land use plan and allowing people to build any which way they like, and also not conducting the environmental impact assessment of constructions. To save cost, we don't go along the contours of mountain regions to build the roads where we have least destabilization. We take the shortest possible route, and thereby we disrupt the geology and the ecology that triggers these things. So they are going to likely continue to happen unless we start looking at, as Dr. Shaheen says, nature-based solutions, geoengineering. But I think the land use plan is the most important thing to say where you may or you may not construct and what kind of construction is permissible in those areas. So we have a question from that corner now.
Assalamu alaikum. Azam Qadri. I'm a historian and a biographer. Aisha, I'm directing, getting back to what you just mentioned about environment. The third point, which you said when they carry out surveys, I think that is the most essential and most important. You will see most of the landslides occurring where the roads have been built. You go to Gilgit, you go to anywhere, any part of Kashmir, and you find the same phenomenon taking place. That was just to add on to what you said. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very happy to see Aisha, you doing a great job for environment. And Pakistan is coming into that threshold where we should have been long time ago. I'll just take a few minutes. 3 points. Number one, our policies of disaster management should be commensurate to the environment. At the moment, I've traveled from north to south, crisscross so many times due to my nature work, and I don't find anything being done towards that. You see, we learn after the disaster has occurred, but are we doing anything on preemption of that? Are we placing any assets which could meet those disasters? So that is an area where I think you've got to seek help from the environment ministry or guide them onto this, so that they can attend to it. There are some immediate threats, and immediate threats are like acidic waste, which is going into our sweet water. Near home, you have Rawal Lake, and the water channels flowing into the Rawal Lake are coming through polluted water, and some of it is acidic. You look at the Lainala, you have a brewery, you have Kohinoor Mill, also throwing everything into the waste which goes into the sweet water. Those are the things where the environment actually has to now come with policing. They'll have to take tougher steps to stop this kind of wanton going-ons that are taking place. The other thing is there's been a lot of talk about afforestation, billion trees and million trees and so on and so forth. I think it needs more study. I did carry out some study of the British when they were here, the British Indian history. They used to plan everything, and it was environmentally planned. Now, what we have with this fog factor and this mist, which is coming the last maybe couple of decades, it wasn't there before. So we need to do some soul searching. We need to do some studies. And I'm always there to, help you out with that. So Environment Ministry has to really hook on to this. Rather than carrying out random kind of afforestation, they have to do a planned afforestation.
Thank you.
Which is suitable.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I don't think there's a question there, but thank you for the historical perspective on environmental degradation. Ambassador Jamal.
I'm under pressure. There is very little time. My question is to Mohsin Saab. He talked in detail about the Indus Basin and the scarcity of water and importance of water. I would just like him to identify 2-3 main things with regard to conservation of water or the strategy that we should follow. My question to Harjeet is that Delhi and Lahore are suffering from the fog, and which is induced by crop burning and other climate activities. What cooperation can be achieved to cater that the cloud that hangs over the Indo-Gangetic plain, what can be done to reduce it, and what cooperation we can achieve? Thank you.
Dr. Mohsin Hafiz, I'll let you respond first. He's not there anymore. Oh, unfortunately, he has also left. That is the problem with virtual participants. So, Harjeet, you are the captive panelist over here. So I'll pass both the questions to you, if you don't mind.
The first one is very Pakistan specific, so I don't think I'll be in a position to answer that. But the second one, when it comes to dealing with smog and pollution, yes, both cities are suffering, but and the causes are quite similar. But in this case, most of the actions that are to be taken have to be domestic, and this has been extremely challenging also for Delhi, which is regularly featuring in some of the most polluted cities in the world. And as you very rightly said, this particular time, 3 months from starting from November to January, even the climatic conditions do not really help when the smoke and pollution is stuck in the environment. And this is where we need to start really assessing the kind of development model that we have created, where vehicular pollution is one key source. Even the crop burning is linked to the development model, the kind of cropping pattern we have, the kind of seeds we have now chosen. And there's a lot of analysis coming from our side of Punjab, where the kind of high yielding varieties that we have chosen, and there's very little time between two crops. Even if you have an economic model to take the stubble and make some use of it, the short time in between forces farmers to burn it, which is the fastest. So there are some fundamental reasons, and as I said, which are linked to the development model that we have chosen, have to be assessed. So it is far more deeper. Of course, I'm not against cooperation, as I keep saying. We need to have cooperation across the board on many issues and challenges that climate change brings. But on this specific issue of pollution, I think it is because the source is very domestic, and that's where actions need to be taken.
Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you very much, Madam. I'm really honored to be here. A very, very enlightening session. I am Dr. Bayaz Hussain Shah from NUST. I don't have a question. I would like to give my feelings as a comment. In fact, what we talked about, there are three streams which we really need to integrate. One is about disasters, second is about climate, and third is about development. Now we have protocols, global protocols. We have some work for disaster reduction. It has life of 15 years, 2015 to 2030. We have climate change protocol, COP21 is there with us. Paris Agreement, which we call, has a life of 15 years, 2015 to 2030. We have got SDGs, and those SDGs also have the same life of 15 years. Now, unfortunately, in Pakistan, we have not been able to integrate these three streams. And we listen our students, we listen our scholars, having a doubt, having uncertainty, not having a clarity that how would we be a resilient country at the end with respect to the sustainability. But this is something which Institute of Regional Studies like this very platform need to focus. Without focusing on integration of these three streams, we will not be disaster resilient, we will not be climate resilient, and we will not be having sustainable development. This is my comment which I would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there are several more questions, but I'll have to close the session now. I want to thank the panelists and I want to thank the audience. I'm supposed to say a few words to conclude this session, but having a great panel like the one we did and a great audience like you are, it makes my job very easy because you've actually said it all. So all I'll do is draw from what you said to close the session. Talking about water, I think it stands out as the number one issue that threatens stability in South Asia. So there were a lot of points that were raised by Dr. Mohsin Hafiz to which we need to pay attention. Question asked by Ambassador Shah Jamal, which remains unanswered. But hopefully we will be able to address these issues as we go along. And in the audience also, there was a question that was raised about this being a very eventful year because 3 billion people are going to go to the ballot and choose the next generation of leadership. for us in South Asia, that's also going to be very important to see how the governments, the new governments that come into power, put the climate manifesto agenda and the need for climate cooperation forefront in their policies. Geopolitics is going to remain very important, and Anoka touched upon a very good point when she talked about the lack of technology, the lack of resources, and the lack of research and development capacities in the global south and within the region. This is an issue that has been coming up at the Conference of Parties as well, that without the means of implementation, even if you provide us with finance, we will not be able to take this agenda forward. So I think in our own region also, we need to buy the best practices and share them with each other so that we learn from each other and we strengthen each other's capacities, because each region and each government and each community has its own skill set where certain way of doing things have worked. And since we have common ecologies, our mountain regions can connect, our desert areas can connect, our coastal areas can connect, and we can learn from each other's best practices and share the knowledge that we have. Gender remains a very big issue, and Dr. Shaheen shared an excellent presentation with us in which she largely talked about the factual situation of where we stand on policy on gender, which looks very well integrated, but when we look at the ground reality, there are glaring gaps over here. How we plug those gaps actually doesn't require money. And that is one thing I always keep bringing up, that to reduce your population growth rate and to give gender equal status in society doesn't require external finance. It's a worldview, it's a perspective change that we need to bring to decide that we are going to treat people equally within our country and in the region. So I think that if we look at the issue in a holistic way, there is reason for hope, because South Asia does present us with a region with tremendous potential, which has not been fully optimized or utilized. So if we use climate as this window of opportunity for cooperation, we can make South Asia more resilient. But it will all depend on the choices that are made by the government and by the people. So I thank you all for joining us in this discussion today and making it so animated and interactive. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, concluding our informative third session, I would like to invite the chair and speakers for a group photo on the stage and request them to take the memento of conference place next to their respected seats.